Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! When I was a kid, my parents were always caught up with work, leaving me with limited company during the day. Luckily, my best friend lived right across the street. We spent countless hours together playing, laughing, and sharing secrets. However, my friend's family had a nanny, and her presence in their home would eventually lead to unforgettable incident. We will call my friend Emily and her nanny the entitled nanny, or EN for short. This nanny was supposed to take care of Emily, make sure she did her homework, and keep the house tidy. In reality, this nanny spent most of her time lounging on the couch, glued to her phone or watching movies, rather than tending to her responsibilities. Emily's grades suffered as a result, and her parents grew increasingly concerned. Initially, when the parents questioned the entitled nanny about Emily's poor academic performance, she'd respond with excuses like, "I tried to make her study, but she won't listen." At first, the parents believed her, but as time passed, they began noticing that the nanny was neglecting her other duties around the house. The parents considered firing her, but the nanny must have sensed it. One day, Emily and I were in her room, engrossed in a movie, when we suddenly heard the nanny's furious voice echoing through the house. She was yelling at the top of her lungs, declaring that the parents couldn't fire her. Emily and I exchanged worried glances, unsure of what was happening. Rushing downstairs, we found the parents trying to reason with the entitled nanny in the living room. "Hey, what are you doing?" the parents exclaimed. "I am not letting you take her away. You don't deserve her. I'm the one who raised her, so she's better off with me than you," the entitled nanny shouted defiantly. It was a shocking revelation. The nanny was claiming that she had raised Emily, which couldn't be farther from the truth. "I am calling the police if you won't leave this house right now," one of the parents threatened. "You can call whoever you want, you MF son of a witch. I am not leaving," the nanny retorted. The parents had had enough. They stormed out of the room and proceeded to call the police. Emily and I were both terrified. We huddled together in her room, hoping that the police would arrive soon. Minutes later, sirens blared outside, indicating the arrival of the police. Parents were outside to speak with them, leaving the nanny inside the house, simmering with anger. Seizing the opportunity, the entitled nanny rushed to Emily's room, locked the door, and turned to us with a manic expression. "I am taking you with me," she declared. Emily and I were petrified. We had no idea what she was talking about, but her intentions seemed ominous. "You don't have to do this," Emily whimpered. Ignoring Emily's pleas, the entitled nanny dragged us forcefully out the room, through the hallway, and into the garage where her car was parked. Panic surged through us as she ordered us into the backseat. "Get in the car now," she snapped. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she begged, "Please, just let us go." But the nanny was determined to escape. She got into the driver's seat and revved the engine, ready to make her get away. However, fate had other plans. One of the police cars had been parked strategically in front of the garage door, preventing her escape route. The entitled nanny's face turned a ghastly shade of white as she realized she was trapped. Just as she attempted to back out of the garage, an officer swiftly approached her car and ordered her to turn off the engine. "You're not going anywhere," he sternly warned. Realizing she was defeated, the entitled nanny reluctantly complied with the officer's orders. She was forcibly removed from the car and handcuffed. The gravity of her actions had finally caught up with her. The entitled nanny was arrested that day and justice was served. She was sentenced to 13 years in jail, followed by 10 years of probation. Additionally, she had to pay a substantial sum of 4,500 euros to the parents as compensation for her actions. With the entitled nanny behind bars, life began to improve for Emily. The parents hired a new nanny who was genuinely invested in Emily's education. With her guidance and support, Emily's grades started to improve dramatically. In the end, Emily earned a full-ride scholarship to college, and the money received from the entitled nanny's compensation was redirected toward a more positive future. Emily and I remained the best friends throughout the years. Today we work together at an international transport company, cherishing the bond we've maintained since childhood. It all started in our quiet little gated community. I had lived there since I was just a 4-year-old boy, and now I was in college. The eldest in my family of 4. Our house nestled in a corner, our sanctuary from the outside world. Our neighbor to the right, well, she was an odd one. Let's call her Mrs. H. Things started out cordially enough between us and Mrs. H, but then came that fateful day when my dad had to lay down the law. It was a simple request, really. He asked her not to discipline me when she was in our house. That, my friends, was the day the bridge burned to ashes. From that point on, Mrs. H couldn't stand the sight of us. You see, Mrs. H had taken an inexplicable dislike to us, and her spite knew no bounds. It was as if she made it her life's mission to make ours a living hell. She pulled every trick in the book, making our existence as challenging as possible. Let me walk you through some of her greatest hits. The first part of our saga of woe involved Mrs. H's relentless obstruction tactics. She parked her car in such a way that it blocked our driveway on numerous occasions. When that wasn't enough, she strategically placed her trash can to obstruct our path as well. If that wasn't inconvenient enough, she even planted white wooden posts that seemed to serve no purpose other than to drive us up the wall. One day, as I was trying to leave for college, I found myself face to face with Mrs. H's car blocking our driveway once again. I sighed and called my dad. "Dad, it's Mrs. H again. Her car is blocking the driveway," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. Dad, who had been dealing with Mrs. H's antics for years, replied, "I'll be right there, son." He marched out to confront Mrs. H, and their heated exchange echoed through the neighborhood. She seemed unfazed by his complaints, and I could hear her condescending tone as she said, "You really should teach your son some manners." Mrs. H's mischief did not stop at driveway blockades. One day, we realized that a card had mysteriously disappeared from our home. It was a birthday card with a sentimental message from my grandmother. We had our suspicions, but we couldn't prove anything. My mom lamented, "I'm certain Mrs. H had something to do with this. She's always snooping around our property." But without concrete evidence, there was little we could do. Mrs. H denied any involvement, of course. The missing card remained a sore point in our family, a consistent reminder of Mrs. H's intrusive behavior. Our family had a beloved cat named Whiskers. Whiskers was a gentle soul who had brought us immeasurable joy. Then one day we found Whiskers lifeless in our backyard under mysterious circumstances. We were devastated and heartbroken. Suspicion naturally fell on Mrs. H, who had a history of animosity towards us. My sister couldn't hold back her tears as she said, "I just know she had something to do with this. She's capable of anything." We had no concrete proof linking her to Whiskers' demise, but the timing was uncanny. It was another dark cloud that Mrs. H cast over our lives. As if her previous antics weren't enough, Mrs. H had a knack for eavesdropping. She had a way of strategically positioning herself in her garden to overhear our conversation when we were out in the yard. Our afternoon, my friend Chris came over to study. We sat in our garden reviewing our notes for an upcoming test. But little did we know Mrs. H was lurking nearby, listening to our every word. Chris whispered to me, "Doesn't it feel like someone's watching us?" I looked around and spotted Mrs. H peeking through a gap in the pines that separated our gardens. I shook my head and muttered, "It's just Mrs. H being her usual nosy self." Now, let's fast forward to the day that turned our neighborly feud into a full-blown legal battle. I was studying for my exams, trying to concentrate on my notes, when a raucous commotion erupted outside. Shouting and yelling filled the air, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I recognized the voice of the one who was doing the yelling, my dad. He had his moments of Karen-like behavior, and this was definitely one of them. I rushed outside to see what was happening. My dad was giving Mrs. H a piece of his mind. She seemed unfazed as usual, but the tension in the air was palpable. It turned out that Mrs. H had ordered the gardeners to cut down a significant portion of the pine wall that separated our properties. Dad was seething with anger as he shouted, "You can't just do whatever you want, Mrs. H. This is our property and you've crossed the line." Mrs. H, never one to back down, retorted, "I can do as I please, and you can't stop me." She even tried to bring my sister into the argument, saying, "How can you treat a woman this way when you have a daughter?" That remark only fueled my dad's anger further. He wasn't one to be intimidated easily, and he knew the law was on our side in this matter. Dad had had enough of Mrs. H's antics. He stormed off to the local police station, determined to put an end to her reckless behavior once and for all. When he returned, he had 2 police officers in tow. The officers surveyed the damage to the pine wall, and it didn't take them long to conclude that Mrs. H had committed a crime by violating our private property. They informed her that the gardeners who carried out her orders could face jail time if my dad decided to press charges. Mrs. H's smug demeanor faltered as she realized the gravity of the situation. Even her husband, who had remained largely neutral in our neighborhood feud, arrived home from work and couldn't hide his shock when he saw the extent of the damage. He muttered to himself, "How could she do something so dumb?" In the end, it didn't come to legal action. Instead, we reached a settlement. The entire pine wall dividing our gardens was replaced with a sturdy cement wall. We agreed to split the costs evenly, 50-50. Mrs. H, who had filmed the entire shouting match with my dad on her phone, couldn't use it to garner sympathy from the other neighbors. It was clear evidence of her wrongdoings, and she found herself isolated even further. Then she entered a somewhat depressed state. It seemed that her relentless pursuit of torment had finally caught up with her. Her neighbors, including us, had grown tired of her antics, and her husband couldn't bear to defend her any longer. He couldn't take it anymore and ended up divorcing her a few months after. Hey there folks, I am back with another thrilling tale about my dear mother, the reigning champion of entitled Karens. You all seem to enjoy my last story about her parking escapade, so here is another gem from the vault. This incident happened roughly 5 months after the infamous disabled parking saga. Picture this. It's 2004 and I'm a fresh-faced 14-year-old navigating the turbulent waters of adolescence. My mother, who I affectionately call Hurricane Karen, has a peculiar penchant for horse riding, a hobby that has never piqued my interest. My sister, on the other hand, is an inspiring equestrian. Through her relationship with gravity, often leaves something to be desired. Now my mother, bless her heart, is not the most resilient when it comes to equine adventures. In 2002, she experienced her first rodeo. Quite literally, a particularly ill-tempered horse decided to buck her off, and the result? A broken leg. Not one to learn from experience, she repeated this feat in 2004. I wasn't there to witness the spectacle, much to my disappointment, but she managed to break the same leg again. I can't quite recall whether it was her left or right fibula, but trust me, it was broken. You know what makes a Karen even more Karen? A Karen in pain. With her leg encased in a cast for a seemingly eternal 8 weeks, the complaints flowed like a never-ending stream. She grimed about every twinge and ache, even though she was doped up on enough painkillers to numb a rhinoceros. But did this deter her from driving? Oh no. We lived on the outskirts of town, and Mom, with her apparent lack of limo drivers at her beck and call, insisted on getting behind the wheel. Yours truly, the unwilling accomplice, was dragged along on these torturous grocery runs. Looking back now, I realize I was essentially playing Russian roulette with my life. Considering the strength of those painkillers and her safe driving with a cast-clad leg. Our regular grocery haunt lacked the luxury of a wheelchair for Mom's use, and she didn't possess one of those trendy moon boots to hop around in. So in addition to her constant moans of pain, she found ample reason to complain about spending a few extra dollars on groceries. If you read my previous tale, you'll know where this is headed. On our maiden grocery voyage with Mother Limbs a Lot, She parked her trusty steed minivan in the coveted disabled parking spot. "I'm allowed to park there. It's disabled parking and I'm disabled," she proclaimed, her logic as impeccable as ever. Can you guess what happened when we returned from our shopping expedition? Take a wild guess. You got it, she received a fine. Shocking, I know. Furious, she hobbled back inside the store with her crutches to unleash her wrath on the unsuspecting store employees. She wanted me to accompany her, but I, dear readers, was not keen on being anywhere near the impending Hurricane Karen eruption. Instead, I opted to stay in a car, attempting to shield myself behind the sun visor. About 5 minutes later, she stormed back, flinging her crutches into the back seat before plopping herself into the driver's seat with a huff. The door slammed shut and a cacophony of inaudible, angry mutterings filled the car. She was fuming about the unfair fine. I couldn't resist chiming in despite knowing the futility of it all. "You still need a permit to park there, Mom. Remember last time?" I had warned her when she initially pulled up, but alas, Karen logic prevailed. "They should have made an exception for me. It's obvious that I'm disabled," she retorted. I sighed, preparing for another fruitless debate. "What about when I broke my ankle? That didn't make me disabled. Temporary impairment doesn't equal disabled." "Temporary what? Get your mind out of the gutter," she quipped, a confused look in her eyes. I suspected those painkillers might have made her hear something else. "Okay, Mom," I conceded, realizing that further argumentation was futile. Sometimes it's just better to let the Karen storm blow over. And blow over it did. Though she continued to sulk for the duration of our ride home, a $200 fine heavier. This marked her second offense and the price had significantly escalated. But true to her nature, she attempted to wriggle out of paying it. As they say, ignorance is not a disability. The subsequent week saw Hurricane Karen nursing her leg, regaling anyone who was in earshot with tales of her equestrian exploits and her perceived persecution by the grocery store's management. Each retelling painted her as a martyr, bravely battling the injustices of the world, one parking spot at a time. Hey everyone, I just got back from my friend's wedding in Mexico, and I need to get something off my chest. I'm wondering if I'm the jerk in the situation, so I thought I'd share the story with you all. So, we were at this fancy all-inclusive resort in Mexico for my friend's wedding. It was a beautiful place and everyone was having a great time. There were some group activities planned, including a dinner reservation at one of the resort's restaurants. Now, here is where the drama starts. The best man, let's call him Dave, had a thing against potatoes. Yeah, you read that right, potatoes. I mean, he didn't have a potato vendetta or anything, he wasn't just allergic, and as far as I know, potatoes hadn't harmed his family in some dark alley. But for some reason, this guy just didn't want him with his meal. Here is where I come in. I happen to speak Spanish, and when Dave asked me if I could help him out, I thought, sure, why not? So I asked the waiter to kindly exclude potatoes from Dave's meal. Seemed like a simple request, right? Well, guess what? They served him potatoes anyway. Let me tell you, Dave was not pleased. He made a big scene about it, loudly complaining to everyone at our table that he had been maliciously served these stracci tubers against his will. He made a big scene about it, loudly complaining to everyone at our table that he had been maliciously served these starchy tubers against his will. The whole restaurant was practically watching and listening to him go on and on about these potatoes. Now Dave did eat the rest of his meal, but he just wouldn't let go of the potato issue. I couldn't take it anymore. The frustration got the best of me, and I did something that in hindsight might have been a bit over the line. I reached over, grabbed the potatoes with my hand and placed them on my own plate. And then, yes, I ate them. Dave was left sitting there utterly stunned. He didn't know what to say or do, and after a moment of silence, he got up and stormed off to his suite. He avoided me for the rest of the trip, but he made sure to let everyone know what a jerk I was and how unladylike my behavior had been. Honestly, all I wanted was for him to stop going on and on about these darn potatoes. It was ruining the evening for everyone, and I just couldn't stand it any longer. Now, my friend, the pride wants me to apologize for causing this whole drama. So here is a big question. Am I the jerk in the situation? And now some comments on a post. Someone saying you're not that jerk. You removed the problem. Hilariously. What's the problem now? Oh, he realized how so easy it was to just remove the potatoes and couldn't take the embarrassment. Or maybe talking about the potatoes was the only thing he could talk about and you left him with nothing to talk about. Another commenter adds, not that jerk. You don't owe anyone an apology. If anything, he should apologize to the party for being a whiny baby man. Also, extra points for doing something that gets you labeled as unladylike. As a fellow unladylike woman, I hope the movement grows and swallows the weak baby people whole. The third commenter goes with, not the jerk. You're the hero we didn't know we needed. I salute you.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread. hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.